Molten Steam by the Flying Shunter. It was late evening on the island of Sodor, and Edward was sailing into his shed, enjoying the quiet while waiting for Boko. The serenity soon faded due to a familiar whistle in the distance. Ginty was on the approach, with trucks of coal for Edward and tankers of diesel for Boko. He slowly came into the yard and backed closer. "Evening, Edward. I've got your coal and diesel," Ginty announced with enthusiasm. Edward responded, "And here I thought you forgot about us. Hello, Ginty." Ginty shunted the trucks and tankers into a siding. "Forget you?" scoffed the shunter. "Might as well forget about the whole Northwestern then." While the workmen were unloading the coal, Ginty pulled up alongside and broke the silence with a question. "Could you tell me one of your famous horror stories, Edward? While we wait, that is." Edward couldn't say no. "Of course, Ginty," the Blue Engine answered. This is the story he told. This story plays out on the mainland, at a charming steelworks, the hottest place in town. It could warm you up when you're feeling down and make a smile out of every frown. Truly a wonderful place to work. The engine who worked there was one of the best shunters, for a tender engine, mind you, you'll ever meet, always getting the work done and keeping everyone safe. However, this engine was getting on in years, but always wanted to prove they can still be useful. The manager, who was also getting up there in years, had always planned to keep his star engine running. But their greatness was the downfall. The steelworks was so much better than the others. The workload nearly doubled every month, with more and more wanting their steel. The workload became too much for the old engine, finally needing help. The manager decided to buy a new engine, but as kind as they were, they didn't really have a good eye for much else. The new engine quickly helped out, easily keeping up with the increasing work, but never thought to look up. By this time, the cranes that moved large buckets of molten steel were old, and the cranes even older. The old engine warned the new one, never stop under the cranes, and would sometimes have to push the new engine themselves. The new engine, of course, understood why the old engine did this and tried to watch themselves, but they never truly could. Eventually, the old engine and the old manager had had it. After a retirement party and kind words from the new engine and the newly appointed manager, they both retreated to a heritage line and cottage, where they continued to work together as engine and guard. "While I'm happy the engine and manager got their well-deserved retirement," interrupted Ginty with a confused look, "but when does the story become more of a horror story?" Edward gave a light chuckle. "It's always calm before the storm," Edward replied. The steel works continued as normal for a while, but the new manager wasn't the best and often overlooked key maintenance and checks for the cranes and buckets, which the new engine soon found out. The day was like any other, shunting and hauling, but the new engine still hadn't gotten into the habit of looking up. The new engine had just shunted ladle trucks under some slag chutes. However, unbeknownst to the new engine or anyone else, the crane right above the new engine had gotten stuck and began juddering around. Something the new engine could have seen if only they had looked up. If only. All the juddering had begun to loosen an important bolt on the bucket, which then broke under the weight, causing the bucket to tip to one side, pouring out all of the hot melted metal. Nobody knew this had happened until the new engine's screams filled the works. Workmen rushed over to find molten steel pouring on top of the new engine. The sirens blared a warning, which was barely louder than the screams or the frantic whistling, which quickly stopped once the whistle melted off. Though the sirens warned workmen of the dangerous spill, nothing could have been done to save the engine. All the workmen could do is watch as the engine was melted alive with molten steel, slowly coating their smoke box, boiler and cab until there was nothing resembling an engine. Eventually, the steel cooled down, leaving nothing but a misshapen blob that barely had an outline of an engine, sitting upon a set of drive wheels. All the workmen and the new manager took off their hats and lowered their heads, and stood in silence as they knew the fate of the new engine. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Work still had to go on. The engine was cut up soon after and melted down, but the engine was not forgotten. The steel works was lucky enough to afford a small diesel shunter from a nearby canal dock, and work continued as normal for a few years. That was until the diesel shunter moved some ladle trucks into place to once again be loaded. But then the crane above the engine began to shake violently. This time the diesel and everyone had noticed, remembering what was said about the new engine. The diesel rolled out of the crane's reach, but this time was hardly the same as last time. Just then, another crane began shaking violently, and another, and then another. All the cranes began shaking violently. Just then, molten steel started gushing out of all possible buckets and ladle trucks, nearly melting off the diesel's shunter's buffers clean off. The alarm started blaring as cranes and machinery all around started collapsing, followed by blood-curdling screams and frantic whistling. The workman and manager began to bleed from the ears due to the deafening sound, all of which seemed to stop once everyone had left the building. Many men died during that horror show, others being injured or had become deaf. Nobody really knew how everything started to fall apart, though it was easy to say what superstition theories left. The steelworks was then demolished and rebuilt under new management, workmen, and new shunter. The story of what happened to the new engine eventually became forgotten, with only a few remembering and fewer willing to tell. Ginty shuddered. Ooh, I'm never going back to the mainland again. I'm sticking with the Northwestern Railway, he announced while regaining colour into his pale face. Even still, added Edward, it's better to get into the habit of taking care of yourself than always letting someone else do it for you. Just then a whistle sounded as James rocketed past with an express goods. Case in point? Ginty questioned cheekily. Case in point, confirmed Edward. Thanks for the story, Edward. Tell Boko I said hi, Ginty sounded before whistling a friendly goodbye and beginning his journey again. While leaving, Ginty looked back at Edward, who was settling further back into his shed. Ginty thought to himself, though he could never decide, whether the story was made up or true to every detail. Ginty would never find this out.